Welcome to Our Texas Land, a place where we take a deep dive into all things related to land in Texas. I'm your host, John Kinsey, and I'm happy to have you join us today. In each episode, we explore topics that might affect you as a landowner, and today, I'm joined by Blaise Korzekwa, whitetail deer program leader for Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Today, we're going to talk about all things whitetail deer and whitetail deer hunting to make sure that our audience is an informed member of the hunting community. So, Blaise, thank you for joining us today.
I appreciate it, John. I'm in a beautiful office here and happy to talk about whitetail whenever I can.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get started with a general question here, Blaise. From an ecological perspective, why is hunting whitetail deer in Texas so important?
It's obviously important just from a population standpoint. It's great to control that population so we don't extend that population to something above carrying capacity, which is just what that property can support from a habitat standpoint, but then also the revenue it generates. Whitetail hunting in Texas, it's a $9.6 billion annual economic output. About $4.6 billion of that is what hunters spend every year on hunting, and about $5 billion of that is what the landowner spends on habitat management and things like that on their property. So on top of that, we also have the Pittman-Robertson funds. It's the excise tax when hunters buy ammunition, firearms, and things like that. That money goes back to conservation then. So it's a great tool, obviously, for population management, but then all those funds are put straight back to habitat work for whitetail deer.
Absolutely. And so making sure that those populations are under carrying capacity is important for health of vegetation communities, to make sure that you're supporting diverse habitat and wildlife populations in general, right?
Yes, that's correct. So it's any type of good deer management is going to be based off of good habitat management. And good habitat management, in turn, creates better habitat for all other wildlife species. So even though that landowner may only be focused on deer management and deer hunting, all the work they're doing is going to benefit everything from songbirds to small mammals to other game species as well.
Right. So in Texas, we have a north zone and a south zone from a deer hunting perspective. Dove as well, right? But talk about deer today. So what does that look like? What are the differences between those zones, and what are the reasons for having those zones?
So obviously the South Zone, people are going to correlate that to what South Texas is. It goes from Highway 90 to San Antonio, and then you kind of follow towards Beeville and cut back towards the coast. South of that is the South Zone, north of that is the North Zone. So before 2001, those zones had different opening season dates. The South Zone actually opened 2 weeks later, and then it ended 2 weeks later than the North Zone did. And then in 2001, the commission adopted regulation changes to push the start date to what we have now, that opening weekend, which is the first Saturday of November. And so those match for both North and South zones, but those end dates stay the same. So technically the South Zone hunters do get 2 additional weeks at the end of that.
And then within those zones, bag limits, harvest rates vary from county to county. How are those bag limits determined? And why is it important to make sure that we maintain that variance in given ecoregions?
Yeah, so the state is broken up into what we call deer management units. Most hunters are not aware of what deer management unit they hunt in, but they know what county they hunt in. So we have 44 deer management units in Texas, and those are broken apart by habitat type, deer population characteristics, land holding sizes, to where we have these units, and those units are comprised of multiple counties and portions of other counties as well. And our staff survey the whitetail population in those counties, and then they also collect harvest data and age and antler data from deer within those counties. So we have a really good idea of what the age structure of those populations are within each of those deer management units, as well as what hunters tend to harvest in those deer management units. So when it's time for a regulation change, it's not that we look at that specific county, we're looking at that deer management unit and how's the population doing? Is it stable? Is it increasing, decreasing? What's the sex ratio look like? Specifically, how many does per buck is average for that deer management unit? And then if that needs a change, we'll make that change to all those counties that fall within that deer management unit.
Are you still doing roadside spotlight surveys to help inform that information as well?
It's roadside spotlight surveys on typically county roads and pretty rural FM roads, and then we utilize distance sampling. So it's a bit different than what spotlight survey a landowner may conduct. It's a much more scientifically based survey in which we can account for those deer that are not seen on the survey.
Okay. So I grew up in Lockhart, that's Caldwell County. Historically speaking, not a whole lot of deer in Caldwell County, especially the northern part where I grew up. Most of it historically was farmland, not a whole lot of cover, not a whole lot of travel corridors. So I tell you, I started deer hunting when I was, 10 or 11 years old. And Caldwell County is at that point was a one buck only county. And it took me from 10, 11 years old hunting with my dad to 16 years old before I had the opportunity to harvest my first antlered deer. So there are a lot of lessons learned over those years in patience. But, today I take my daughters out there in the same piece of property hunting, and we are covered up with deer, both antlered and doe. In the early 2000s, there was a antler restriction implemented in that county and others. Can you talk about why that was implemented, maybe some of the science behind it, and what the results that you've seen over the years from the benefits of that antler restriction?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and you really summed it up, is that some of those counties there historically had very low deer populations. I remember visiting with some folks, even with my parents and relatives, that hunt in that Wilson, Karnes County area, not too far from Caldwell, and they would see deer pellets, and they're like, oh, there was a deer here at some point, so that was exciting to them. So historically, it's been very limited harvest. That population has obviously built back up, and then those antler restrictions were put into place in 2002. There were 6 experimental counties east of San Antonio that those were implemented in. And those counties had very, very high harvest rates of young bucks. In the 1990s, those counties had upwards of 80 to 90% of bucks harvested were what we call young bucks, 2.5 and younger. So they still had a lot of room for potential, but the issue with harvesting that many young bucks is, although it's hunters see it from a antler standpoint, it drastically changes the natural age structure of that buck herd. There's not many mature bucks when that young buck harvest is that high. So we looked at different ways to protect those younger age classes and ultimately decided on a 13-inch minimum inside spread. Some other states use what they call APRs, antler point restriction, but the issue is that has potential to actually harvest some of those higher quality young bucks if you use APRs. But with the inside spread, you protect nearly every 1.5-year-old buck, and then there's some 2.5-year-old bucks that will reach 13 inches, but we're really looking to get those deer to be at least 3 years of age. And that 13-inch spread has really helped with that. And it's been popular. There's always folks that disagree with it, but the impacts have been great. So just 3 years after that first season in 2002, the harvest rate switched to where it's now 70% of bucks harvested are 3.5 and older. So just within a matter of a few years, it switched that harvest structure up. And it was so successful. It started in 2005, we added more counties. 2009, we added more counties. It's now in 117 counties. We have antler restrictions in Texas.
Yeah, I've seen the benefits firsthand. And just to be informative to our listeners, those antler restrictions are a minimum 13-inch inside spread.
Yes, that's correct.
And typically, Caldwell County, we moved from a 1 buck only county to a 2 buck county, one with an inside spread of 13 inches or greater, and then one with at least one unbranched antler. Is that fairly common throughout the state in those restriction counties?
Yes, so every county that has those restrictions, it's still a 2 buck county, and they're allowed 1 buck over 13 inches, and they're allowed a 2nd buck with at least one unbranched antler. So usually that's going to be a spike or a 3-point or something like that.
With the increase in population that we've seen, specifically the little property that I hunt, it started to become obvious that we probably need to figure out how to harvest some does, right? So, and correct me if I'm wrong, from a Texas Parks and Wildlife standpoint, when we're talking about managing deer herds, we're strictly talking about numbers, right?
Yeah.
Some of the other habitat enhancement techniques that your biologists are recommending and teaching private landowners can aid in antler development, but primarily what we're talking about is a pure numbers game, right?
Yes, it's purely numbers, and most of those numbers are because of the doe population. And the more abundant the doe population gets, the more fawns you have every year, and the more fawns you have, it's a snowball, and it kind of starts to compound on itself if doe harvest isn't a basis of deer management.
Right. And so there are doe days now. I believe they're the week of Thanksgiving.
Yeah, so in Caldwell County, it's a 4-day doe season.
Okay.
So that from the Thursday of Thanksgiving through the Sunday following Thanksgiving. We also have counties north and east of there that have a 23-day doe season. That's from opening day through the Sunday following Thanksgiving.
Where can our listeners go to look to find those regulations and see if they're in an antler restriction county or if they have doe days that are 4 days or 20 plus days?
Yeah. Best way is to download the Outdoor Annual app. It'll be on your phone, and you can pull it up, and you can, if you want, you can allow it to use your location, and it'll pop up with your county. If you don't want to go that route, you could just choose your county from the list. And it'll tell you season dates, what zone you're in, what the bag limit is, if you have doe days, and if you do, how long they are, and then also if that county has antler restrictions.
Okay. So along those lines, I wouldn't characterize myself as necessarily an early adopter of all things, but I'm usually not really late to the game. I still have not converted to a digital license and digital tags. Can you talk a little bit about how digital hunting licenses and digital tags work for whitetail deer hunting?
Sure thing. So in 2002, we rolled out our first digital license, and that was only for resident super combo licenses. And then it's been that way since. We've added a few more every year. This year, every license we offer, you can have a digital license for. So in prior years, we averaged about 20% of our licenses were digital. This year, licenses went on sale August 15th, and we're at 30% of our licenses sold have been digital. So every year it's gained a little bit more, and it's easy. Most folks have a smartphone now. You already have the Outdoor Annual app on your phone probably, so you just link your license to that account. And then if you're hunting a species such as dove, we have dove season coming up, that you don't have to tag. It's as simple as if you get checked, just pull up your phone and you show them, here's my license and the date you bought it, and you're good to go. If you need to tag something, then there's a way to tag that animal, and you'll receive a confirmation number. And then you'll just write that confirmation number down on a piece of duct tape. Some people will take a piece of paper and zip tie it to the deer, but you still have to mark that animal with that confirmation number.
That's good. I'll make the switch for you.
Yeah, and so I'm still old school. I have a paper. I haven't got this year's license yet.
Right.
I'm likely going to go digital. And then my son with his license, I'll likely get a paper one for him just because he may go hunt with my dad. So I can just send him with this paper one instead of having to link up his account to the phone and everything.
That's right. Yeah, I'll probably maintain paper tags for my kids.
Yeah.
For sure.
But it's definitely nice. And with some species, such as wild turkey, for instance, so last year we had mandatory reporting for wild turkey. So you already have to report it on your phone. And it's the exact same steps. If you had a digital, tagging that animal will also report that for you. So if somebody is maybe not as much of a deer hunter, but they're going to turkey hunt, you already have to report it on the app. So you can go a digital license and it's no more steps and it's already tagged in.
Excellent. That's convenient. Okay, so to this point, we've been kind of talking big picture, county-wide, deer management unit-wide, but if you're a landowner in Texas, you have another option to more intensely manage your property and your deer population, and that's through the Managed Land Deer Permit program, right? Now, there have been some changes to that program in fairly recent years. So there's two options that landowners can look at for MLD tags. Can you give us kind of an overview of the purpose of the MLD program, what that does for landowners, and what those two options look like today?
And so that the MLD, or the Managed Lands Deer Program, started in the late 90s as a program that would incentivize those landowners who conducted habitat management practices. And then their reward is they get these MLD tags and a longer season. So it's been great for improving habitat on private lands in Texas, and especially when we have that incentive for landowners as well. And it's grown very drastically in popularity, up to the point that we recently had to begin charging for it just to hire enough staff to maintain that program well. This year we're a little under 30 million acres in MLD. So extremely popular program. MLD cooperators harvest about 20 to 25% of the harvested deer every year, which makes sense because that amount of acreage that's enrolled is about 20 to 25% of the suitable deer acreage in the state. So it happens to just kind of work out math-wise. But historically, we had 3 different levels to MLD. I still hear some of the old timers refer to the level 1, 2, and 3. A few years ago, I believe 2017, we switched to the harvest option and conservation option, like what you mentioned. That conservation option is the exact same as what we used to call level 3. Those landowners still do the habitat practices. They'll conduct a deer survey on their property, and our local parks and wildlife biologists, as well as private consultants, will often help them with those surveys. And then based off of those numbers, we'll provide them a harvest recommendation. So on top of that recommendation, they have long season dates. They receive the MLD tags to be able to harvest out there. So in some cases, they're able to harvest more deer through that program than what the county bag limit would allow them to, because they're no longer using their license tags. They're using that MLD tag to tag that animal in. So it's been a great tool for ranchers to manage the deer population, especially those that may have an abundance of too many deer, specifically too many does has been a thing. And then the other option, the harvest option, is an automated issuance. So back to our regulatory spotlight surveys that staff conduct, we have assigned deer density values to each different habitat type in Texas. So a user of the harvest option will map their property, and it will give them a recommended harvest based off of the layer of habitat types on their property, as well as their acreage, and if they're low fenced or high fence. It's an automated option, so staff don't have any input to give them more tags. But usually it's a good starting point for somebody who may want to get their feet wet with MLD, but may not really be sure if they want to go the conservation option route yet. But it's also a good option for those landowners who may not have the time or the resources to conduct that habitat practice or do a deer survey, but they still need a means to control the deer population.
Sure. And so with the conservation option, there's a checklist, there's a wildlife management plan. A lot of our listeners, a lot of our clients would be familiar with this because a good chunk of our business is related to 1D1 wildlife valuations for property tax purposes. So that wildlife management plan, a lot of those practices that our landowners are probably already doing are practices that also qualify for the MLD program, right?
Yes, that's correct. So we're really looking at those practices that benefit the actual habitat. I know on the 1D1, one of those is supplemental feeding. So for MLD purposes, supplemental feeding does not count as a habitat practice, but the majority of landowners that are in 1D1 are doing plenty of practices to qualify. So those are some of the easiest properties to get qualified for the program because they're likely already doing a deer survey as their census requirement for 1D1, as well as some form of brush management or supplemental water. That counts as a practice as well.
What about, you mentioned surveys and survey techniques. What survey techniques are accepted by Parks and Wildlife for MLD program harvest requirements?
It's a wide range of different techniques, and much of it depends on what ecoregion you are in Texas. So example, in South Texas, a common practice is a helicopter survey. It's low-growing brush. We get decent visibility from those surveys, but that practice would obviously not work well in the piney woods, to where something like a spotlight survey would work well in the piney woods, but not so much in South Texas because we have that dense shrub-type habitat. But everything from helicopter, spotlight, camera surveys, some smaller properties could do some form of stand counts or incidental observations in which they just keep track of deer that they see while driving around. It's not a good density estimation, but it gives them some herd composition on how many bucks or does do we have, and should we focus harvest on bucks or does. And one technique that's really became popular is a thermal drone survey. That's been highly effective at getting pretty good estimates of the deer population on places.
Is that technique limited by habitat type as well, like a helicopter, or is it more ubiquitous? Is it more usable across ecoregions?
It's a bit more usable than helicopter because it's using thermal, so you can still see through a little bit of leaf cover. But a place like the piney woods, where that drone operator is going to have to operate at a much higher height, it will be difficult there. But places such as the Edwards Plateau, South Texas, the Rolling Plains ecoregion, it's been a very good tool in those areas. It can be acreage prohibitive just because it takes a while to do those surveys, but for your average landowner, it's a great survey technique.
Excellent. Can you speak to the use of white-tailed deer survey data for MLD, maintaining a consistent survey type across years? What is the importance of that from a trend perspective?
Certainly. So each of those survey types, it has some variables that we can account for. And some of that's even based off of the time of year a survey is conducted. For example, a helicopter survey flown in the fall is going to see a lot less deer than a helicopter flown in the winter, simply because of the leaf defoliation on trees, specifically mesquite trees in South Texas. So maintaining not only that survey technique, but also the time of year that survey is conducted is going to help in the trend data. It's difficult to make a harvest recommendation looking at a single year of data.
Yeah.
You've never seen the property except for that data. What's really important is that trend data.
So a few years back, we had our first positive detection of chronic wasting disease in the state of Texas, and some of the implications of that for our hunting community has been testing requirements and different zones and areas surrounding a positive test maybe have mandatory testing requirements. I know there have been some changes to what CWD testing requirements are over the past few months. Could you give us a brief overview of what those requirements are? Are there still requirements, and what does that look like?
No, good question. You could do a whole podcast on some of the CWD topics, sure. But just the kind of that high level view. So we've been testing for CWD since the early 2000s. In 2012, we had our first detection in Texas in mule deer, is in the Waco Mountains in the Trans-Pecos ecoregion. And then from that, we did set up zones in that area. And those zones had mandatory sampling requirements, as well as some restrictions on live animal movements and testing. And then in 2015, we had our first whitetail detection in Medina County. And then, of course, we had a zone for that. And that's when in 2015, that's when we really jumped up our surveillance efforts on sampling We average about 13,000 CWD samples that staff collect every year. That's from roadkill animals to hunter harvest. Our staff have great relationships with the landowners they work with, as well as meat processors and taxidermists. But what we were doing was every time we had a positive, we had a zone in place, mandatory sampling requirements, carcass movement restrictions, likely had to set up check stations. So then we had to hire staff to man those check stations and hiring seasonal employees to work those check stations so our staff can still do the work on private lands that they're known for. And they got to be to where it's a route we just could not continue on anymore. As we continue to set these zones up, the amount of acreage in zones got to be really high. And then the first step to get out of zones was, what management activity are we doing in a zone to manage for CWD? And the main activity was carcass movement restrictions. So if you harvested a deer in a zone, you had to quarter it before you can get it out. We did have some hardships. There's some older hunters who they just want to take it to their favorite processor back home, and they couldn't do that.
Sure.
Last season was our first season in which we had statewide carcass disposal requirements. And that was well received by hunters because that also allowed them to debone their carcass. So where in the past you were not allowed to debone your carcass until you came to what we call your final destination, which was your residence or processor. But now hunters could debone their carcass anywhere as long as you dispose of those parts properly. So preferably they would debone at the property of harvest and just leave all the parts there. So they just take home the meat with them. If they take home the carcass, or if they just simply quarter the meat and take that home, those requirements would require them to dispose of those parts in their trash. Most trash goes to a landfill, so they could put it in their trash and it goes to a landfill. That's what most hunters will do. If that's not an option, they can take those unused parts back to the ranch and dump them there. And if that's not an option, very few folks I talked to had to use this last option, but that would be to bury it at the other property. Because what we don't want to do is you harvest a deer in South Texas, take the entire carcass up to your house in the hill country where you have 30 or 40 acres, process it there and chunk those parts out back.
Absolutely.
We've had cases such as in Del Rio where CWD was spread to that area because of a similar practice because of that. But since we had those regulations adopted, now we were able to remove zones. So this past January, the commission adopted to remove CWD zones and remove mandatory testing requirements. So now testing is simply voluntary through hunters. Our staff still have great relationships with landowners and hunters, especially those that are members of the MLD program. So our staff are still going to collect around that 12 to 13,000 sample mark, which is above and beyond our quota for us to have some statistical significance as far as our confidence in testing.
So I'm a bit of a data nerd. The importance of increasing that sample size to increase your confidence that CWD is not present in a given location, A, and B, not being moved from one location to another. What is the importance of having voluntary testing by our hunting community?
It's certainly important, and it's not so much the number of samples we get in a DMU, but it's more so the distribution of those samples within a DMU, because you can collect several hundred samples off of a few ranches, and those ranches are probably clean, but that doesn't give you a picture of the overall landscape. So distribution of those samples, and we just released a public-facing CWD dashboard on our website.
Okay.
And that has a ton of information there in which hunters can go and they can view how many samples we've collected in that DMU for that year, as well as a 3 mile by 3 mile grid on how many samples have been collected in that grid.
Okay.
So they can go on there and find their property and say, okay, there's plenty of samples around me. I'm confident hunting here without testing. But then they may have a place where there's been no sampling around that. That may be a place where that hunter or that landowner may want to test some of their harvest this year. But
Sure.
With any disease, the early detection is key because it gives them more options for management. And as far as managing CWD, at the end of the day, good deer management is good CWD management. We're trying to provide recommendations to landowners. We're a private land state. We're not going to force their hand to do anything, but we've had some examples of other states where if you don't do anything, this is what could happen. But in general, just managing that deer population to be at a right number of deer for that property, and working with our staff or with somebody else to provide them with that number is a great way to start.
Sure. So we had Mike Bodenchuk on for a podcast. We were talking about wildlife diseases specifically, and the term citizen science came up a couple of times. So along that same theme, I think it's important for us, Plateau, to urge in the name of science to test, to sample your harvest and get those samples into the hands of the scientists so that we can be more certain around our management strategies, if they're effective, if they're not effective. So please take that opportunity for our listeners. Go ahead and pull that sample, regardless of whether you see several samples around your area. And especially if you do log onto that website and see that geographically there's not a whole lot of samples in your given region, go ahead and pull those samples so we can get them into the hands of the scientists.
Yeah, right. I appreciate that, John. And one thing that it's on everybody's mind, but New World screwworm in Mexico. So it's not in Texas, so we're not in panic mode or anything, but it's something our staff in South Texas have been reaching out to landowners, and we've had lots of meetings. I spoke at a workshop down in Live Oak County on screwworms, another workshop next week at a deer symposium, talk about screwworms again. But it's that communication and that citizen science, because we cannot be looking at every single deer in Texas, but landowners will hunt. They have trail cameras, so obviously any sick animal is something that they can notify our staff about, whether it's their local biologist or we have regional health specialists within our big game program that cover different ecoregions. So just contacting them would be a great way to start for any type of wildlife disease.
And yeah, I mean, you guys, y'all do great, right? You do great work helping the private citizens of Texas, but you're limited. You're limited in numbers. If nothing else, you're limited in numbers. You can't see everything. You can't hear everything. So just, again, to speak to the importance, I guess it's if you see something, say something type instance here. Don't be afraid to speak up if you see something suspicious.
Especially with wildlife, and specifically with my role with white-tailed deer, it's such a large economic driver in a lot of these communities that we obviously want to have a lot of whitetail. It's a lot of hunting opportunities. So doing everything we can to sustain that is important.
We've had some pretty good rains this year. Habitat's looking great from my driving across the state. Just in general, how do you anticipate this deer season to be from a numbers perspective?
It's going to be a great year. So last year, for example, we had about 750,000 deer hunters, and they harvested 837,000 white-tailed deer. So a lot of deer being harvested. I expect us to probably be a little bit higher than that this year, just due to what you mentioned, John. With those good habitat conditions. So early spring and that kind of March timeframe, much of the state was in drought conditions, but right after that, the rains really kicked on. So most places had really good rainfalls mid to late spring, and that's going to boost antler production, which is something hunters always want to hear. And then the mild temperatures we had in the summer compared to last year's, I often see on the news the number of 100-degree days we've had, and it's lower than years from recent years. So that's great for fawn survival. So we should get good fawn survival and have really good antler production. And specifically, when it comes to harvest, we often get kind of sucked into, well, what's the rainfall this year? But you really have to look back, well, what was the fawn production 4, 5, or 6 years ago? Because now those are your middle to mature bucks you're going to have this year. And when you get a good year 4, 5, or 6 years ago, and then you have a good spring like we had, it really sets itself up for a good season.
So if some of our listeners are interested in any of the things we've talked about, MLD programs, obviously they can give us a call and we can direct them to the right place. But if they want to contact TPWD directly, who is the right person for them to to locate, and how can they locate them?
The best way is to go to our website, the Texas Parks and Wildlife website, and there is a link on there to find your biologist. Another way is you can pull up Google, like we always do, and you can type in tpwd find a biologist, and that top link will take you to that web page, and you choose your county, and it will have their contact info as well as the senior biologist contact info and their supervisor's info. So I would suggest reaching out to that county biologist, and they can set you up, whether it's MLD or you just have a general question and you just want to manage for wildlife on your place and you may not have an interest in MLD. Don't hesitate to reach out to them with questions.
Wealth of information there. Something that's obviously important to me as a father, but as a hunter, to make sure that we're carrying on the hunting tradition. Talk to me a little bit about youth hunting. We typically have some specific youth hunting seasons to get kids out, give them some opportunities to harvest maybe a little bit earlier than others, maybe a little bit later than others. Can you talk to me about what those youth hunting seasons look like across the state?
Yeah, so we have a early youth season, which is the Friday through Sunday before the general season opens up. And that's in both the north and the south zones. And then we have a late youth season. And really with that, we're looking, it's a time for the youth to get out and have a chance to get some harvest before maybe their parents focus a bit on hunting during the general season. So it's a great time for their parents to take their kids out. And a lot of it is with how many folks are now living in what we may consider an urban community. How do we get them involved in hunting? And those youth season dates provides more flexibility on when they can hunt. And then there's also programs such as the Texas Youth Hunting Program that provide hunting opportunities for those folks who may want to go hunting that don't have access to land in Texas. So it's a great way to get them involved in hunting.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I was involved with an organization for well over a decade based out of Mason called Operation Orphans. And we would take kids historically from boys and girls homes, from foster situations, and local landowners would donate hunts to those kids in the area. And I volunteered for that program for a long time. They're still in existence. It's just I haven't had the time to get out there and do it like I want to. But it's super important to get those kids involved in being outdoors, whether it's with a rifle or not. Just being outside and learning an appreciation for nature. And there's camps. I've talked a little bit about Texas Chapter of the Wildlife Society's conservation camp on a previous podcast episode, and it's a week-long, intensive, almost college-level natural resource training crammed into a week, and it's hosted by the Texas Chapter of the Wildlife Society. But there's other programs out there like the brigade programs, and you've been heavily involved in the buckskin brigades in the past. Can you talk to us a little bit about maybe the brigade program in general, but specific to your involvement in buckskin brigades?
And so the Texas Brigades, it's a wildlife youth leadership camp, and there's camps all across Texas. It's for 13 to 17-year-old kids. There's camps what we call buckskin brigade, so they're white-tailed deer focused. There's a bass brigade, which is freshwater fisheries, coastal brigade, ranch brigade, which is livestock production, waterfowl brigade, and bobwhite brigade. So all of those, it's based on a species, and it's full of activities for the youth, but at the same time we sneak in these leadership activities, so they don't really think they're getting leadership activities. They think they're having fun, but at the end of the day they are now excelling at public speaking, standing up in front of kids the same age as them and having to kind of step out of their shell a little bit. But it's been great. I've been involved with brigades going on 11 years now. I was on the board of directors for a bit, and then I've been the camp coordinator and the president for South Texas Buckskin Brigade, and I still volunteer at that camp as an instructor. We've had that camp down at the Chaparosa Ranch, south of La Pryor, for the last few years there. And it's been a great opportunity for those kids to visit, not only with Texas Parks and Wildlife staff, but we also have private ranch managers, AgriLife extension agents, and folks like that are very involved with the hunting community. And it's a crash college level course in deer management. The first day we do what we call deer on a half shell. We open up a deer like an oyster, and they learn the the track that food takes from when it enters the deer's mouth all the way until it exits the deer. They learn all about the different chambers of the stomach, antler development, fawn development, the importance of habitat, plant identification, how to age deer, how to score deer. And a lot of times they'll go home and correct their dad on the hunt. Like, now that's a 4.5-year-old buck, not a 3.5-year-old buck, dad, and this is why, and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's great. And those are great programs. And there's a specific to whitetail deer. There's a South Texas Buckskin Brigades, and there's also a North Texas, correct?
Yes, there's a North Texas Buckskin Brigade, and it's very similar camp setup. It's usually whichever camp the families live closer to, but then also the habitat component will be a lot different. So even though you may have gone to the South Texas Buckskin, you'll still get a lot out of going to the North Texas. It's a different set of instructors, but then it's a totally different habitat type.
That's excellent. And you said it was age group 13 to 17?
Yes, 13 to 17.
Okay.
And applications open up in November, and then they'll close in the spring. So the earlier they get in, the better, so those camps can start preparing.
Okay. And there's just a Texas Brigades website that they can go to locate that?
At texasbrigades.org.
Excellent. And that's a wrap for today's episode of Your Texas Land. We hope you enjoyed hearing a bit from Blaise and I about whitetail deer and whitetail deer hunting in Texas. Thanks, Blaise, for joining us today.
I appreciate it, John, and look forward to this upcoming season.
Until next time, keep being an advocate for Texas land. Thanks for listening.